It is frustrating, but unfortunately, fat loss really is this simple. Most guys make it complicated in the wrong places, arguing about hormones, age, insulin, stress, cortisol, genetics, testosterone, etc. But what decides whether you gain or lose fat is far less confusing. So in this video, I'm going to show you a simple fat loss quadrant that explains why some people lose fat consistently, why others stay stuck for years, and why losing fat feels out of control at times, even when it isn't. So people love to debate why they can't lose fat for reasons such as being much older compared to when they're in their teens or their 20s, insulin resistance stopping them from being able to lose fat, stress or cortisol levels making them eat more food, obesity running in the family.
Doctor, there's nothing I can do about this. The problem is that obesity runs in our family.
No, James. The problem is that nobody runs in your family.
Or low testosterone, slow thyroid and metabolism, and whatever else could occur. There's all these other reasons. And all of those do exist, but none of them directly decide whether you drop fat week to week. What actually decides is much simpler and kind of boring. It comes down to whether your inputs are consistent and effective enough to create a calorie deficit over a longer period of time. However, this is where most people get stuck because they can't see how unstable their inputs actually are. And that is why I put together this simple fat loss quadrant so you can check on this where you actually rank. Once you see how this works, confusion disappears. So the further up and to the right you go, the more stable things are. The further down and to the left you go, the harder fat loss becomes. So let's start at the bottom right quadrant. And this is your unstable food with a stable burn. This is typically the guy who is strict during the week, but then blows out every weekend. Or, some days you might meal prep perfectly, other days skip meals, eat out, and then turn into a binge at dinner. There might be phases of zero alcohol and very strict dieting, followed by periods of eating and drinking whatever. So food intake is never consistently stable. However, workouts and daily steps are consistently moderate to high effort, like 10 to 12,000 steps or more per day, and rarely missing a workout. So the calorie burn is actually stable, but the weekly deficit keeps getting erased by this unstable food. And that's why the scale can feel random and unpredictable. Bringing consistency into your daily food intake stabilizes the deficit so that fat loss becomes more predictable and sustainable for you. But there's also the opposite problem, and that is a stable food with an unstable burn. This is where meals are consistent with your portions and your calories, rarely eating out, not much random food, not much binge eating, but steps, workouts, and daily activity is all over the shop. One week, there's a big push with extra training, more movement, or maybe a huge hike on the weekend. You get like 30,000 steps, and then the next day, you get 3,000 steps. Then life gets busy, steps drop, workouts get skipped, and activity just crashes. So calorie burn becomes unpredictable. And when the scale doesn't move, people assume that their diet is the problem. They start blaming things like bread, peanut butter, one piece of fried chicken, a little bit of slice of cake, or thinking that something is wrong with them, or they need some special supplements or Ozempic or whatever else that is a quick fix. But in this situation, food isn't the problem. The burn is too inconsistent to know whether you're actually in a deficit week to week or not. So until your activity is more stabilized, fat loss will continue to be unpredictable, or we'll get stuck in like these plateau phases, which gets even worse with this next quadrant that you should avoid at all costs: unstable food and unstable burn. So even if people are eating healthy food and working out often, this quadrant can still be happening. And it's where most people end up quitting. So food intake is guessed or assumed to be healthy enough, and daily activity is just like a yo-yo, and it's usually influenced heavily by emotions and a lack of sustainable structure. So nothing is stable for long enough to actually measure what's really going on. There's very little real data being tracked, and this is why it's the hardest quadrant to lose body fat in. Not because fat loss is impossible here, but because it's unmeasurable and inconsistent and frustrating as hell. And that is why this last quadrant I'm going to explain is the most important one: your stable food calories and stable calorie burn. Fat loss is the easiest here. It might be more boring, but it works because it is predictable and repeatable week after week. It's the predictability that gives you control over the small tweaks and the fine tuning to get the results that you want to get to. It doesn't need to be extreme with heroic weeks followed by crashes afterwards. So by keeping your food and your burn stable, the deficit is going to show up more clearly over time. And this is the least confusing, simplest, most sustainable way to approach it. But it's also where guys start to push back because they will say things like, yeah, but I'm not young anymore. My hormones aren't the same. I've got insulin resistance in my gut. My metabolism is slower. All the stuff that we talked about at the start of the video, right? But none of these things move you out of the quadrant that you're actually in, because you can still have insulin resistance and still make fat loss brutally difficult by having unstable food intake and an unstable calorie burn. Or you can simply keep both more stable with any condition that you have. Fat loss is challenging for everyone at every age with any condition or no condition, and it only gets harder when life gets more volatile, like with hectic schedules, kids, more social eating, inconsistent movement, and shitty sleep. These quadrant rules still apply, whether you're busy or not, whether you're young or not young. The difference is as we age, the body punishes this instability just slightly more, slightly less energy, and slightly slower to bounce back from problems. But to put this into perspective, I have clients in their 60s who have visible ab definition who are doing chin-ups with weighted belts. So at some point, the excuses have to shut up. And the reality is, whatever the data keeps showing you that is true about what you are actually doing or not doing is the key. And here's what I would focus on instead. So if you look at people who are stuck in the worst quadrants, they all have one thing in common. They don't actually know what is happening day to day, week to week. There's just no consistent biofeedback data to rely on. They're just guessing, trying, hoping, praying, using their feelings and their moods and reactions, or following other people's plans that were not built for them. And that is why motivation becomes a crutch, and it always fluctuates. You get stuck in these plateaus. But when you rely on your own data, it tells you what to do next. Regardless of how you feel, you can put the feelings to the side and just execute. And if you randomly add more cardio, it's still going to be unstable, right? If you jump between different diets, eating nothing for 2 days, binging on the third, it's still going to be unstable. Stability and consistency is how you will win at this long-term fat loss game, to get and stay lean. And it really does help to approach this like a game, because anyone can play it and anyone can get good at it. So if you want help installing this stable system built for your goals around your schedule that works even on your busiest weeks, you can work with me one-to-one using my data-driven approach, metabolic recon method that gets my clients six-pack lean. To learn more, tap the link in the description. Or if you don't need any accountability or customization, you can grab all my systems and frameworks inside the Business Body Blueprint routine. Link is also below. Then go watch this video next so you can see the 7 signs to check that you are actually losing body fat.